It's now time for the second panel of the day. Using courage for change in the LGBTIQ plus perspective in changing the ratio. And this I've been very excited about all day. The panel is being presented by WPP. Here to welcome the panel is John Steady, Chairman, Media and Investment Management, to introduce the panel. Steady.
My name is John Steedman, but I'm referred to as Steady. The only person that calls me John is my mother, and she's no longer with us. So that's how I go by. When people ask who's John Steedman, they go, oh, no idea. If they ask who's Steady, oh, that guy, yeah. So I hope today's gone well for all of you. Diversity and inclusion is the core people strategy going forward at WPP AUNZ. The way we define diversity is across many sectors, including gender, sexuality, culture, background and religion. Yesterday, we had our first Diversity and Inclusion Council meeting where we invited 5,000 people to register to be part of the council. We had over 50 applications. That's an incredibly important part of our diversity inclusion program going forward, and I'm very glad to be the chairperson for what I believe is an incredibly important part of our business going forward and our people. We have just started the journey when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We have a lot of steps to go. But we started off by putting in place a target of 50% leadership positions, both men and women, by 2021. And I'm absolutely committed to making that happen, as I said, a firm advocate of diversity and inclusion across our group. And it will be driven hard. It's even part of every manager and CEO within our businesses. It's part of their KPIs in terms of how they're rewarded. So it's going to happen, come hell or high water as far as I'm concerned. We're keen to expand our knowledge to provide a safe working environment for everybody, and I mean everybody within our operation. Congratulations to the Change the Ratio Committee and B&T for having the foresight to put on today's event. To our panel today, the Australian public voted on marriage equality in 2017, and overwhelmingly 60% of our population voted for same-sex marriage. I was heartened to see the industry get behind the Yes campaign, and in fact I was very much involved with the Yes campaign committee. I worked with them closely in getting them gratis airtime across various media channels. And they were incredibly welcoming and offered their support to a very large extent, which we're most grateful. So it prevailed and overwhelmingly prevailed. I thought it might be, at this point, I might just give you my own personal story when it comes to this. It's about facing your fears. You know, back 10 years ago, I got divorced. Just over 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to come out. But I wasn't quite sure how. So I sought help. So I saw a counsellor for some time to help me in how I would explain it to my family, my children who are now in their late 20s, my ex-wife, my work colleagues and my friends. No one had any idea whatsoever. And that was incredibly helpful. And I do say to everyone in this room, you know, if there's ever a situation where you fear something, seek help. It is so important. So how I approached it was I spoke to my kids who were incredibly supportive of it. I spoke to my wife who was supportive of it. I then spoke to my work colleagues and how I sort of open up, because no one had any idea whatsoever. So how I opened up the conversation was, mate, you know how you think I've been seeing this lady up in Thailand? And I said, yeah. Well, it's actually not a lady, it's a bloke. And when I told my my PA at the time, Claire, I said, Claire, I took out each of the leaders within our companies individually and told them. I said to Claire, bye-bye, as I said before. She went, is this can of camera? I said, no, Claire, it's for real. Oh my God, she said. But every one of those people that I spoke to within our organisation and the industry were incredibly supportive of me coming out. I even got a phone call from David Gingell, who was running the Nine Network at the time, saying how he was so impressed with how I did it and the way I went about it. Now, 7 years ago, I met as I said, my partner, who's since moved to Australia and has become an Aussie. And we're getting married. We're getting married in the Hunter Valley on August the 31st, and I can't wait. And most importantly to me is that my son is the best man. And my daughter's part of the wedding party, so I'm very happy about that, and I can't wait for the day. So now I'll introduce Tom Stevenson, who is the talent acquisition leader within WPP, AUNZ, who is going to be hosting this panel. And I'm going to pass across to him. And they will examine the LGBTI workplace and what inclusion looks like and what a long road we still need to take in regards to this part of the minority groups. So, Tom, are you around? Yes. Oh, up there.
I need to be a little bit louder. This is an Ellen DeGeneres. Here we come. I want people clapping, 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 clapping. Get up, everybody, sing. We are family. I got all my sisters with me. Miss Stevenson. Get up, everybody, sing. Hello, good afternoon, Changing the Ratio. How are you? A bit of life in the room. That's magnificent. As Steady said, I'm Tom Stevenson. And as we've heard, there is something about Mary, but what I need to say, it's not all about Mary. And thank you so much for indulging my Ellen DeGeneres fantasy right then and there. I'm a little bit out of breath, but there it is. I'm terribly unfit, all good. Thank you, Steady, for your introduction and for sharing your story. That's very, very powerful. Personal thanks for being a trailblazer not only in our industry, but also in your unwavering support of diversity and inclusion in all its forms and your commitment to our business. I thank you so much for that. Before we continue, I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered this afternoon, and to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So to our panel. A few months ago, I met with the organisers of today's event, and I wanted to discuss the importance of bringing an LGBTI perspective to our conference today. The challenges faced by LGBTI employees in the Australian workplace are unique and they are varied. Whether we care to admit it or not, transphobia and homophobia still exist in our industry. I've sadly both experienced this firsthand and watched it happen in agencies and businesses that I've worked in for the last decade. People are getting burnt out from having to self-edit all the time, and we are in the midst of a mental health crisis here in Australia.
I'd like to challenge the perception that employers in the marcoms industry are fine when it comes to LGBTI inclusion. And I'd like to make the bold statement that we are not actually as progressive nor open-minded as we think we all are. So in order to help me unpack this notion, I certainly don't have all the answers, and that's what today is all about. It's about learning. I would like to introduce my wonderful panelists. Please come up as I introduce you. First of all, we have Elaine Czulkowski. Elaine is a former fundraising manager for Australian Marriage Equality and now works as the operations manager with ACON's Pride Inclusion programs. Each year, Elaine is part of the team. No dancing? Oh, please. Elaine is part of the team that puts together the Australian Workplace Equality Index and awards. Throughout the year, her team assists businesses, healthcare and sporting organisations in all facets of LGBTI inclusion. In a former work life, Elaine worked in management consulting for the Boston Consulting Group. Give it up for Elaine. My next fabulous panellist is Katherine Maver. Katherine is currently a senior leader within IBM, where she manages some of their more complex projects both in Australia and in New Zealand. She's also the president of the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Business Association, and rather surprisingly, was the first trans woman in the organisation's 38-year history to hold that title. In 2018, Katherine was the founding member of Trans Pride Australia, which promotes visibility and awareness of transgender and gender diverse matters in the greater community. Please welcome Katherine. And last but by no means least, all the way across the Nullarbor from WA, we have Simon Thuijs. Simon is a strategist with the brand agency, which is part of WPP AUNZ, and he is a trailblazer for diversity and inclusion in all its forms. In 2018, Simon founded the inaugural Perth Pride Sports Festival, bringing together 7 different sporting codes, building on its experience, starting Perth's first ever LGBTIQ+ inclusive hockey club, the Perth Pythons. Please welcome all of my panellists. All right, I can sit down and we can let you guys do some talking. How does that sound? All right, so actually I'm just going to do a little bit more if you don't mind. Just a few stats for you, because stats are important, right? The Diversity Council of Australia released their Out at Work report in 2018 in conjunction with Deloitte. This proved the link that has been spoken about time and time again today, about the link between business strategy, good business, and D&I. The council found that LGBTI employees who are out to everybody at work are 50% more likely to innovate than those that aren't. They're 35% more likely to work highly effectively within their own team, and they are 28% more likely to provide excellent client service. So bearing that in mind, and bearing those statistics in mind, my question first is to Elaine, if you could answer this first. Why is it so important that LGBTI initiatives form part of a business's D&I strategy?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Tom, and thank you for the lovely welcome. And I'm glad I didn't have to dance. Well, I think apart from it being the right thing to do, which more and more businesses are realising it isn't just the business case, but when I worked at Boston Consulting Group and in many of our members, you do have to put a business case forward. And if you look at the industry you're working in, the creative industry, you want diversity of thought, you want to bring different demographics into your workplace to make creativity, take it to another level. And some more stats, just to add to Tom's stats. We did an employee survey, we do it every year along with the index. And the employee survey, anyone can fill it in. You don't have to do the index to fill in the survey. We had 23,000 responses last year, and this year we had 32,000, so it's filled in by the employees. Last year, 18 to 24-year-olds, 43% of them are still not out in the workplace. And the reasons they said it's because they don't feel that it's a safe place to be out. And this is across many industries as well. It's not just the top end of town, or I think it's a lot of industries. They don't feel that they'd be supported if they did come out. They don't know what the repercussions could be. They don't know about their career path. They've also heard homophobic, transphobic comments within the workplace that have just gone unchecked. And they've also heard their leadership teams actually say, we don't need LGBT inclusion, we're fine. So if you're a young 18 to 24-year-old looking to go into the workplace and you look at a website, you look at, and you don't see yourself in that website, or you're already working in the workplace and you don't feel comfortable, you won't be productive, and you'll spend a lot of energy. And Mike Abid, who is the CEO of SBS, speaks to this quite a lot for many, many years when he was at IBM. He was self-editing all the time. So you can't focus on your career path, and you can't be a functioning member of the team. So it makes good business sense. I like to try and think it's done from the goodness of people's hearts, but at BCG, I knew when the marriage equality campaign was happening, which I was part of, Westpac were one of the first top end of town businesses to say, we're going to come out and support marriage equality. And so I thought, hang on, I work in financial services sector. My boss works, this is one of his biggest clients. And I went into him and I said, we should sign up for marriage equality and support it. And I don't care whether you agree with the marriage equality or not, but I want Boston Consulting Group to support it. And you can ring your, Brian Hartzer at Westpac and say, hey, Brian, guess what we've just done? And Boston Consulting Group signed up for different reasons and for better reasons.
Fantastic, that's great. I'd like to pivot slightly and talk about when we're talking about the different facets of the LGBTI community, because they are, sometimes we get grouped together. There are obviously clear distinctions between sexuality, gender and sex. Could you explain the differences? And Katherine, I might go to you on this. Could you explain these differences and some considerations that we need to make when thinking about the differences between gender and sexuality?
Hi, everyone. So most people kind of group them into one, Everyone kind of does that. But I kind of put it on a different angle. I'm a trans woman. I'm a male to female post-operative trans woman. That means I've had surgery, which is great. So therefore, I'm part of the T, but I sleep with men. So I'm a woman who sleeps with men, therefore I'm heterosexual. Try and get the head around that, some of you. I know some of you are.
That's because
it's actually going,
huh?
Seriously? No.
Yeah.
Basically, and my partners, I've never slept with a gay guy. Because all of them see me as a woman. So, because I identify as a woman. So my partners are actually heterosexual. Yet, ironically, I actually work, well, not work, but I actually live and actually socialise in the LGBTI space. And that's where I think where you've got to get your heads around, there is people, like gender, there's so many different facets and all that sort of stuff, and sexuality has different facets. But you've got to keep them in separate buckets because when they do cross over, it is going to challenge you.
Fantastic. No, thank you. That's great.
Can I just add to that, though?
Course.
Because we do, as you say, mention, we talk about the community, and it is actually a communities. And the reason it is communities is, a lot of people are isolated, a lot of LGBTI people are isolated, and they're just singular. So when they come out, they're not in a community, maybe a cultural community or a religious community. They're just one person. And to get your voice heard, you go and find like-minded people, and you need support. So that's how we've all sort of come together to get our voices heard, rather than be just one person in the wilderness.
No, that's exactly right.
Intersex, I think, is probably one thing to bring up. If you're unsure of what intersex is, there's 75 plus different variations of someone, and intersex people sometimes don't like to be called a community, and that's why people and populations is the phrase sometimes. But fun fact for you all, more statistics, is that there's 1.8% of the population who are born with an intersex variation, and that's very similar to the penetration, or 1.8% of people have red hair. So I'm sure you all know someone with red hair. You may also know someone who has an intersex variation.
No, fair enough. No, thank you, Simon. I will stay with you, Simon, and I want to ask, what can we learn from the sporting world? We've seen a very obvious example of homophobic behaviour being called out at the highest level of sport recently. Bye-bye, Israel. How might some of your experiences, both as a sports person and creating a Pride in Sports festival, translate into our workplaces?
Well, Tom, I think it starts with compassion for all people. No, I think sport and workplaces are experiences. And if I can tell you about mine in the sporting field, I grew up in a town 4 hours north of Perth called Geraldton, as it's colloquially known, Darrow. And I played every sport under the sun. There's one street in Geraldton where they all are 8th Street, because we weren't creative enough with our names. They're all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 10 streets in Geraldton. And I played netball, basketball, tennis and hockey. And I stopped because I was sick of being called a bassoon on the field. Obviously, none of you have done music because the Latin or the word for bassoon is a fagotti. Yes, okay, well, we got some musical knowledge to get up on. So I stopped playing hockey, which was a massive strength for me, that sport. And the only reason I came back was when I studied in London on exchange, I was welcomed by an inclusive hockey club there. Went to Stockholm, played in the Euro Games and beat Australia. Sorry, guys. And then I played for Australia at the Gay Games for Perth after coming home, being severely depressed and starting up my own club as therapy. And we took our first team to the Gay Games last year and brought home gold for Perth. So, thank you. Now, digressing from the question, that's my experience which propelled me to create an experience that transforms something for other people. In sport, it's a negative brand usually through childhood trauma, through bullying, through the change room experience. Yep. Cultural shifts means that the way that you change that schema in the mind, we all know it as a brand, is through an emotional experience. The sports festival, by having your family watch you, by having cheer squads, by having awards not just for the best sports person, but for team goal celebration, is a transforming moment that endears those 300 athletes to sport for life. And those kind of experiences is what we need to translate in the workplace, not just the sporting field. The only difference is that work pays me and no one pays me to hit a hockey ball yet. And that payment is for my survival. And that is why we need to transform that experience.
Fantastic. No, I totally agree. We're talking about quite a lofty sort of goal here, transformative workplaces. And I want to take it back a little bit, and I don't want to be negative, but I want to ask, have any of you, and feel free to talk, but I know that Katherine, you especially spoke to me about this earlier, have you ever actively been encouraged to change who you are, to make your career easier? Tell me about that.
Yes.
And what your influenced your thoughts and stance.
So I transitioned 27 years ago, a long, long time ago. And I guess I'm one of what some in the trans community would say lucky. I'm not built like a footballer. I'm like petite. I present very well. I'm very confident in who I am myself. And so after I had surgery, I was actually encouraged by a whole lot of people to go into the closet. Go back in the closet, don't disclose. And for around about 5 years, I'm afraid to say, I did exactly that. Because I was told, you're a woman now, you don't have to disclose, and your career will not be affected. Now, that was in 2000, and you kind of think, yes, there was a few eyebrows that raised there. That was in 2000, and I was encouraged, and I basically didn't come back out of the closet until around about 2005 because I felt comfortable. And many times you do get that basic question around the water cooler on a Monday morning is, what did you do on the weekend? I just got tired of actually putting a story out there. You know, I just caught up with some friends and watched a movie at home. I was on Oxford Street dancing on a podium.
Which you still do.
I wasn't.
I'm showing my age. Yes,
Okay, we still do it.
yes, I still do. No, I do not do that.
sorry.
Seriously,
Oh, it's me,
yes, I do not do that. No, never. Okay, been a while. Anyway, so and this is the whole thing. It is it is actually draining to you to not to actually be open about your life. It's actually draining, and it actually is like, and I it's like, the best way of saying it is like wearing a backpack. And every bad experience of that, you're throwing a rock in the backpack. And every time it gets heavier and heavier, and then you start to slouch and all that sort of stuff. And you guys are in a creative industry. I work for IBM. We're technically creative. Not as
Very technically.
very technically. Yep, sorry. But this is why it's important. I know it's, and I want to apologise for the swearing, a wanky term of bringing yourself to work, your whole self. It is actually true. You are more productive. You know, you don't have to worry about being tripped up about the story. You literally create another life because you're afraid of actually what people are. The good thing is I'm obviously out and proud very now. My career has not stopped. It actually has gone gangbusters since I came out again. It's very weird having to come out twice in your life. It's just weird, seriously. But I'm lucky. I have the full support of IBM. I'm probably the most senior out trans woman in IBM Asia Pacific. I get to go speak to you guys, which is awesome. I do go to world conferences, which is fantastic. I don't get to sit at the front of the plane, unfortunately. IBM's too tight for that, but that's awesome. But I'm small, so I can fit into a small economy seat, so that's okay. But yeah, I just want to say it's really important why being out, because, you know, and I still do get my friend who says, I know I shouldn't tell you, but, you know, your life will be different. And it's like, no, yeah, my life would have been different. I wouldn't have been happy, you know. And if I'm not happy, I can't be productive. If I'm not productive, you know, I'll probably end up losing my job because I look at numbers all day and that's boring as crap anyway. So, yeah.
Fair enough. How about you, Simon? Has your sexuality impacted the way that you navigate business and maybe client conversations?
Well, there we go. So mask this morning. Definitely. So I'm a strategist. I am speaking with execs and in persuading them to make investment decisions in a transformation of their workforce, in a new website. And the way that I do that and the way that you build trust is through vulnerability. Open palms, soft voice. Come into your mind. And I'm able to do that with you today. But I have a little thing in my head which is first round be fake, round 2 be you. First round be fake is, hey mate, how's it going? Yeah, love the footy, mate, yeah. West Coast Eagles, ew. Don't watch the footy and I'm eating the NRL tomorrow. I know they're rugby. So I'm going to fake it. And I do that to anchor their first impression in all of the privilege that I have being a white male. Anchor that first impression in all of the things that will help me get what I need to champion my agenda. And as you can see with all of the first person pronouns, selfishness is not something to be like put down. Selfishness is one of the best things you can do for others. And I am going way off topic here. However, bringing it back, the question was about at work then, round 2, I be me. I wear this fabulous shirt, so I felt comfortable enough today to skip to round 2. Thank you, everyone. And what we've found is that that's a wonderfully great selling tactic. And just today got an email through that, this new campaign that we're doing's just been signed off, which is the largest one in the University of West Australia's history for digital transformation. So it works and it gets results.
Fantastic. No, that's great.
But I do self-edit, is the point.
And I think we all do to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I certainly do as well. Being in doing what I do as head of talent acquisition, There are a lot of senior leaders that I meet, and I think first time fake it is a very eloquent way of putting how I am sometimes. There's some of my team sitting here as well, and they have said to me, why do you use mate? You don't call any of your friends mate. Are you the seagulls from Finding Nemo? Mate, 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 mate.
Moin.
So it's interesting, and I think that there is that certain. I'm completely comfortable with who I am, but there's that certain sort of stigma that sits here, and it is that first time fake it mentality. So,
but I think you can equate it to sort of try and put everyone here in other people's shoes. Is your first week at work, and when you start a new job, you sort of never go in and tell everyone about yourself in your first week. You go in and you sort of look around and you get the lay of the land. You sort of find out who's into music, if that's what you're into, or who's into, before you start giving things away about yourself. And for a lot of LGBTI people, it's like that every week of every year. So you can imagine, your first week is anxious and you're stressed, and you go home and you think, oh, that was I've got to go back tomorrow and do this. That's what it's like for a lot of LGBTI people every single day at work.
No, you're right. We'll stay with you, Elaine, and what would you say to leaders in our businesses across our industry that say this is a non-issue for us? We've always supported LGBTI people. We do campaigns which represent the community. We align with Mardi Gras. We've got an LGBTI population that reflects that 11% of the population. Aren't we done here? Isn't that it?
Yes. Well, I wish. Sadly, the numbers and the stats tell us we're nowhere near done. And especially in the current world situation where we look at governments around the world who are either doing zero or doing actual negative things for not just the LGBTI population, but for women and for, on the gender scale as well. So when you have governments who are neglecting their duty in looking after the minority groups and the vulnerable and the disadvantaged, it's up to businesses to actually step into that gap, as they did with marriage equality. I worked on the campaign for 10 years, and I've worked on LGBTI projects in communities for 20 years. And all the MPs knew that we wanted marriage equality. They knew that the LGBTI population wanted marriage equality, but they were not listening to us. Some were. We changed talk about changing the ratio. I think when I came on board with Alex Greenwich was there before me, and Rodney Croom, I think there were probably 15 to 20 MPs who were for marriage equality, and in the end we ended up getting the numbers we wanted, and that took a lot of conversations and it was real stories and real people and conversations that changed it. But we weren't getting the MPs across the line that we needed to get across the line, and it was only when businesses stood up and said, we're not going to let this happen. We're going to look after our LGBTI staff. We've got family, friends, our communities, and it's the right thing to do. And it was only when business stood up to say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to come out in favour of marriage equality and support it, that the MPs started listening. What was even a bigger shift was towards thankfully the end of the campaign, when we had the awful postal survey to deal with. First of all, that had such a damaging effect on the youth, because LGBTI youth had never been through anything like this. Some of us older, not pointing to you, Katherine, some of us older birds, have been through things for many, many years, and it was quite a shock for them to see in social media, to be attacked, and it was, so we had this postal survey that we had to win. If we didn't win the postal survey, marriage equality was going to be put to bed for another, until we got the next government in, which didn't happen. So I went to I had a lot of connections with the LGBTI networks in businesses around town, and I thought, right, big business can come out and support and give their voice, people like Brian Hartz at Westpac, Alan Joyce at Qantas, but big business couldn't give us any money because of their stakeholders, their boards. We did get a lot in kind, and thanks to Steady as well, and a lot of other people helping us with our advertising campaigns. But I went to the LGBTI networks in business, because they do have a remit to fundraise, to give us volunteers. And I went to them with a very prescriptive list, and we had thousands. The response within 3 months was just incredible. We had thousands of people, allies, stood up for their colleagues, their LGBTI colleagues and friends at work, and said, we're going to support this by doing phone calls, handing out leaflets. Visibility, rainbows are very important. It's a silent way to say you support people. So it was business that actually changed the Marriage Act and the thousands of allies that helped do that. So business does have a role to play, and within your own business, LGBTI inclusion is still definitely something that has to move the dial forward.
Elaine, can I make a quick anecdote on that? The allies and empowering them in that campaign was incredibly powerful. I was asked to make the case to my grandma because she was voting no. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to put myself in that position of requesting acceptance from those closest to me. And so I was empowering my own family to make the case on my behalf. And while they didn't step forward, you guys did. So thank you.
Thank you to you all. We did a lot of hard work.
A lot of people in this room.
I'd like to, I'm conscious of time and I want to get onto some pragmatic and practical solutions that the people in the room can take back to their businesses. So what advice would any of you give to an organisation that might be a smaller agency, for example, that's pretty new on this journey? What are some steps that they can take? And this isn't our takeaway. It's the step before.
The steps. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can sort of lead on that. It's always it can be to a lot of organisations quite scary when someone comes along, a leader comes along to their HR or their D&I and say, you've got to do something about LGBTI inclusion. And the first thing is fear, because they may not know anything about the LGBTI community. Well, we're not that scary. And it's all about being brave and seeking out the right advice and talking to experts, probably like someone at Pride in Diversity. Just a little plug.
WPP,
Elaine. But it is sort of speaking, asking questions, speaking to experts, getting the right advice, but also don't try and do everything at once. Yes, there's a lot to do for some companies, even some bigger companies. Qantas, another example. Alan Joyce, CEO, out. Always speaks out for marriage equality. They only got their LGBTI network together 2 years ago because they realised if you're a lesbian baggage handler working in, some regional airport, having your CEO being gay and out, it's great, but it's not doing much for your inclusion within your department or area where you work. So an LGBTI network was necessary. So even big organisations are starting on the path. They're not always there. So I think it is just don't try and do it all at once. Speak to the people who know how can guide you and give you a strategy, and bring allies on board. You'll be surprised how many people out there just want to do something.
Yeah, fair enough. For either of you as well,
I was saying the tried and true evidence-based HR proven method is this kind of start with policy before you go celebrating, move on to visibility, and then transform your culture. But before you roadmap this out, before you get an external consultant on board, which you should very much do, I think fear is the problem to solve. And this is a great one for smaller agencies. Steady already said it. Internal fear is one big problem within ourselves. External fear is what drives discrimination. When you fear something, you lash out at it. And then HR practitioners will harp on home about the biggest hindrance to organisational change projects is fear. And the antithesis of fear is safety. And safety is the biggest thing that you can do in your workplace. And safety is an enabler beyond audience segment. It solves the intersectionality issue. It solves world peace as well, I think. So,
we wish. But something you mentioned there, intersectionality, because we found through my experience with LGBTI networks and in my old role and in my current role, is there is a lot of passion in the LGBTI area. So that does tend to get a lot of focus because the people just want to do it. So it's usually the network and allies who do a lot of the work. So it's not all on HR and D&I. But a lot of the work that is done in the LGBTI space can transfer across to other groups as well, like multicultural, like gender. and things like that. So the work you do, the core work, can, there's a lot of intersectionality there that you can take across so everyone can benefit from it.
No, that's a very valid point. Great. So just quickly from Simon, being the strategist on the panel, how do you think we're doing as content creators and media owners here in Australia about equally representing diversity and gender relationships and families?
I've loved watching what I have today, and there's some incredibly positive examples. I'm not going to go into good, bad, and whatnot. I think in the good category, you have things which are shifting cultural norms. And in fact, these are not categories. Every single piece of representative media has good and bad attributes. And so the harmful ones are usually a bit of tokenism, going to market when you're not doing something internal. So wonderful to hear ANZ were pushed to do something internal. Talking about, what you're doing for your customers but not your employees, and making a large financial gain without reinvesting that gain back into the business to recharge that ROI cycle. The great elements are that representation shifts cultural norms, shifts mindsets, gets young queer people thinking more positively. So without going into the nitty-gritty, I think creative teams in the room, think about that before your next campaign and weigh it up. And if you're an executive, you're a manager, and you're going to greenlight that next diversity brief, remember the reality principle is there will be backlash. ANZ have already told us the gay TMs were smashed. But reframe it in your mind, not as negative critique or NPS decreasing feedback, but see it as the most rapid progression of feedback that will fuel your organisation in the shortest amount of time. That is what agility is. You will go to market and 16% of your customers will give you a 30-point hit list of what you need to change in the next 3 months, and that is your business case for doing it because they are your customers. That is how you need to view that, as an opportunity. Thank you for this brief, let's do it. Not, I'm scared. Because I tell you what, if I lent into the fear that I had every day, I wouldn't be up here right now.
Me neither. And so I think, and that's been a common theme actually in all 5 of us in what we talk about and really facing that fear as well. So it's you're welcome. Thank you. That's really nice of you to say. In terms of, we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions, if there are any questions for this Brains Trust, and then we're going to go to one takeaway from each of... There's no time for questions, Mary?
No,
we're good? Sorry, just don't want to get in trouble with Mary.
Sit down.
Heaven forbid, ladies and gentlemen, we get in trouble with Mary. Has anyone got a question? Burning question? Anybody? Up the back there?
What can companies do to create that safe environment for all people? I'm on the Diversity and Inclusiveness Committee at my company, and I'm very passionate about it. What's safe to one person might be scary for another person, so on and so forth. And, the horrible, how long is a piece of string concept. But the point is, what does it look like? And how can we create that? And what are some of the basic elements that help people feel comfortable and safe?
Sure.
Well, Sam did mention sort of the basic thing that has to be entrenched is the policies, because your policies are what apply to everyone or should apply to every one of your employees. And if they go to even want any leave, it could be parental leave, it could be for surrogacy, and if they don't apply to them or it doesn't look like they apply to them and they can edit themselves out and eject themselves from it, they will. So having your policies, first of all, which sometimes it's just a tweak, it's not a lot of work in there, but also something that is totally the opposite scale. BHP have just recently, all their mine sites, they sent rainbow laces to their mine sites. And we've just done some training, LGBTI awareness training on about 5 different mine sites out in the middle of all sorts of places, the coal loaders and everything. And there's these people in high-vis jackets, hard hats and boots, wearing rainbow laces. And one man rang their LGBTI network leader and said, I've just come out because of seeing the rainbow laces and I realised now my workmates, it's okay. And, that helped him come out of work in a very tough industry, in a very tough area.
Yeah.
So it can be something as little as rainbow
Visibility.
laces.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to do in between, but again, it's baby steps, and you can get there.
Can I answer that? I've had an idea yesterday, so I'd love your feedback on this. I think an enabler is, you bring up the great point, safety is different for everyone. And as soon as you think you know what makes someone safe, you've made the first misstep. So it's not just, flexibility is a massive enabler of it, but it's still limited. How can we personalise the workplace experience one-to-one such that we're creating safety? And where I go to for inspiration is my digital strategy background. We personalise websites and digital experiences one-to-one. We used to go, when you click this ad link, segment into men and women and make that banner pink or blue. Now, and that categorical thinking is where you might segment your D&I strategy and go down a non-scalable road. Now, when you click an ad link, we have 6 attributes about you, and we personalise the headline, the image, the page hierarchy, and everything. And Sitecore is a wonderful tool to use for that. Now, imagine if we could do that in the workplace. Instead, the ad click is you coming to that business. How can we collect information about you in a way that makes you feel comfortable? And then management needs to personalise that website, that experience, and that requires trained managers who feel comfortable and agile enough to personalise that contract and that experience. And then you will scale belonging in your organisation. So I had that idea yesterday. Hashtag WPP. I haven't put it to the council yet, but be talking about that.
Yeah, so it's about that personalisation.
Sure.
Great. We've got 2 minutes left according to this thing down here. So I'd like to throw to Katherine first of all, because you haven't spoken as much as the other two.
This would have been really good. Okay.
Good, okay, fabulous. Katherine, and I'd like to go to each of you for this. What's your one key takeaway? What's an actionable thing that we can do at work tomorrow or Monday to make a difference here?
It's the big thing about transgender people is the stereotype. When you see this in the media and all that sort of stuff, it's normally sequins and feather boas, i.e. a drag queen, which we're not. Or if you actually look at the media, it's normally a prostitute or someone who's actually down in their dumps. You know, they've been hard life. I'm not saying my life is easy, but I actually have a fabulous life type thing. I've never worked in either of those industries. I've never done a show in my life. I have 2 left feet. Of course, you guys, I know these guys have. And I just said, don't stereotype. You know, you don't actually understand the pressure that most transgender people have every day. And whacking a big banner of a stereotype of what everyone kind of perceives as a transgender person is actually really more detrimental than everyone else. So don't, hopefully I've opened up something.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Thank you. Elaine?
I think it's be mindful and sort of, when you go back to work tomorrow, look around your workspace and, is there an ally, a LGBTI rainbow sticker anywhere? Just have a look around. Is there someone who doesn't actually join in when you're having morning teas or you're going out on a Friday night for drinks and things like that. So just have a look around and just be mindful. I think that's the first step. And then, get informed, and there's a whole lot of it. And also speak out if you see or hear anything that you think is, could be seen as bullying or homophobia or transphobia in the workplace. Speak out, call it out. So that's sort of the first few steps. There's a lot. I could go on forever, but I don't want to overload you.
My joke answer is partner with the Pride Sports Festival and have a branded experience to transform the redefined sport. But my real answer I want to do right now, that is, let's try and uncross our legs, palms up like this. This is a chat with ourselves.
Okay, right.
Yes, I've got your trustworthy.
I don't sit with my legs apart.
You want to chat with either your manager or an executive or a frontline employee or of yourself, and take a deep breath in. And in your mind, remember that despite the butterflies and the anxiety in those legs or whatever the physical bodily experience is, that you are safe and that you deserve to give yourself safety before anyone else, and give yourself this every single day.
Fantastic. Thank you. And that's all we have time for. Can you please give it up for my fabulous panelists, Simon, Katherine, and Elaine.
All of the people around us, they say, can they